Good evening, GCLS members. I'm Cheryl Head, your Director of Inclusion, and we want to welcome you to the inaugural session of the GCLS Online Book Club. One of our goals for the book club is to promote our fabulous author members, but also we want to continue the community building that happens each year at the con. So we're very glad you've joined us tonight. And I see there are like about 25 of us here and more joining as we go along. Our small board committee has been very busy working to launch this new monthly members-only activity. And I'd like to give a shout out to our team, Beth Burnett, Maria Raming, and Ann Geary, and a special tip of the hat to Joy Van Stralen, who is handling our technology tonight. Our first book club author is Ann McMan, and our first book is her award-winning romance novel, Beowulf for Cretans, A Love Story. Let me give you just a few housekeeping items before we start talking to Ann. We're going to start off with all of you on mute. That'll help us to minimize unintended noises and sneezes. I'm going to lead off with a few questions, and Ann's going to read an excerpt for us. Some of you might want to follow along on your book, but we hope you'll also feel free to participate with your own questions. There are two ways to ask questions. One is there is an icon on your dashboard to the right, which is a hand. I hope you can see that. I'm not seeing it on my screen. If you can see it, would somebody shoot me there it is. Okay, I see it. And then you can also jot your questions in the chat function box, which is below. But if you do that, just make sure you're making your question to everyone so that I can see it, because I'm going to be queuing up the questions and making sure we don't ask redundant questions. So Ann, I'm glad you're with us tonight. It's good to see you in person.
Good to see you too.
I'm going to start off with one question for you that I had on my mind. So this is a really charming story. I don't read a lot of romance, but this one is full of lots of charm. I had to run to my dictionary several times. I love the humor in it. Tell me this. Was it your readers that convinced you that your Grace and Abby love story needed more space, needed a bigger footprint?
Yeah, no, it actually was. The original, the inspiration for the book was a short story I wrote that appeared in my story collection Sidecar back in, golly, 2012, maybe.
Wow.
I don't even remember, what year it was, but it was a little story called Falling from Grace. And I did a really terrible thing where I kind of just sort of chopped off the ending at the moment where after Grace and Abby have met at this party and had a one-night stand, Grace goes home to discover that the college she works for has hired a new president, and it's guess who?
Yes. Nice.
And the short story kind of ended right there. And it was a story that I had originally posted online at the Academy of Bards back in the days when a lot of us, did that, to get things out there. And I got tons and tons and tons of feedback from readers who kept asking me, what happened to them? Are you ever going to finish the story? So it was only 2 years ago that I finally decided, well, maybe I'll do that.
Huh.
Maybe I can revisit that and actually, oh, pardon me, I have a very important.
Yeah. Is it wine?
No,
there you go. Cheers.
It's called courage.
Cheers.
Now you know how I get my inspiration to write.
Yeah, that's right. Was the story nagging at you? I mean, so even though the readers had said we want to hear more, was it the readers' voices you heard, or was it the story nagging at you?
It was actually both, because I retired from my full-time job. I worked in higher education my entire career, and I had always wanted to write a book someday about what it's really like to work on the campus of a small college. So, as I approached,
I'm laughing because yes, you can really tell the work
absolutely, absolutely, and a lot of the really sort of crazy, or the confluence of crazy personalities and situations and things that go on, in that kind of a closed environment. So I'd always been really wanting to do a book that was set in a place like that. So I think it was kind of the combination of the two things: the fact that I had this little perfect setup kind of banging away out there like the telltale heart, and then this desire I had to kind of create this whole world of a small college and then set the story in it. So it was fun for me to do, and it was a story I always wanted to write.
That's wonderful. Do you have an audience in mind when you're writing a novel, Anne? Is
Yes,
it
I do.
silent?
I hope one day they'll actually read the books. Um, no, of course, I mean, do I have an audience in mind? Yeah,
Do you?
I feel like people who I think of when I think of people I know who actually, read and laugh at and understand and like my books, because my books are sort of quirky and weird and different. And even though they're often humorous, they also skate along the edge and sometimes dive into these pools of really sort of deeper and more difficult topics. So, I do have those folks in mind, and I know that there are people who will go on those journeys with me, never quite being sure where they're going to end up or how they're going to find their way out.
The humor is such an undergirding of all your books.
Yeah.
The witticisms and the smartalecisms and
Yeah. Yeah.
it
Surprises
feels
you,
like,
doesn't it? It's the me
yeah,
you don't know.
well, it feels like you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that
Well,
always going to be important to you?
well, I think for me, it's how I tell a story, and I think it derives really naturally from the life I've lived.
Hmm.
I grew up in a home with an alcoholic parent, and a lot of other unhappy stuff, domestic violence and sexual abuse. I'm a sexual abuse survivor, and one of the things I've learned through many, many, many years of really hard work to try and recover from all of that is that when you are the youngest child, like
Okay.
I was,
Okay.
we very often become what is called the mascot in the
Hmm.
home. And one of the things that we do, one of the roles that we play, at least many of us, is that of the person who can distract people from what's happening. Like, you can be funny, you can make a joke, you can say, hey, look over here at this, and try to diffuse really difficult situations with humor. And I've done that sometimes to my own detriment, but I've done that in my entire life. So it's not
Hmm.
really a surprise that I write books that have really serious themes, but they're presented on this framework of craziness. Because to
Hmm.
me, that's kind of one of the ways you can write about difficult stuff. You can you
Absolutely.
can you
Right.
can kind of counterbalance it with comic relief. You can make people look at something really hard, and then you can pull back and make them laugh.
Right. It's um it's disarming. You break the tension in the room when you do that kind of have that kind of technique.
Yeah.
I think I've heard Dorothy Allison talk about it because she has some of the same
Yeah.
background, right? Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, it's interesting that you mention her because she's, I'm not alone in this, but she's such an icon to me, and always has been an inspiration to me even before I started writing. But for anyone who read my book Goldenrod, which is much more serious in tone than Beowulf, but one of the main characters in the book Goldenrod is a 14-year-old girl who's being terribly abused by her father, and it's
Hmm.
not an accident that her name is Dorothy.
Yes. Wow. It's not.
And I'll share something with all of you. It's kind of like like a second coming out. Um, Anne is my middle name, and my first name is Gail. And in the book Goldenrod, Dorothy's full name is Dorothy Gale.
Ah.
So yeah, so I do have that kinship with her. We've actually talked
Right.
about it.
Well, that takes care of my
Oh,
question
is
about
that all of your questions? Can I
autobiographical
have my drink
elements.
now? Are we there?
Yeah, where you first have a
Oh,
drink.
yeah,
Yeah,
thank
that
you.
certainly, it felt to me like there were some autobiographical elements.
Oh,
It's certainly apparent that you knew about small town colleges. I mean,
oh
I've
yeah.
been to smaller
Oh yeah.
colleges. That felt really authentic. So we're going to ask you to read a little bit, an excerpt of your choice. But if you would let us know what chapter it is, Anne, maybe some of us will want
Sure.
to follow along.
I
I'm reading on
actually,
my Kindle, but I'm
okay.
happy.
Oh yeah, on your Kindle, I don't know how to tell you. Let me
Yeah,
see.
I'll figure it out if you tell me what chapter, and maybe others
Okay,
will want to follow
I
along as
sure
well.
will. You know, I do think I put chapter headings in this book, so I just need to find one. I know this is a very long chapter. I believe this is in chapter 6.
Chapter 6. Okay.
And it's several scenes in. And for anyone with a paperback, it's on page 142. I'm actually reading this for Carlene Spry,
Okay.
who earlier today asked me if I would read the scene where the main character, Grace, who is trying to fix a big misunderstanding she had with Abby, sneaks over to her home, the president's home, in the dead of night,
The
and
trellis thing.
yes, and basically decides she's going to break into her house by climbing the trellis.
I love the thing.
So, you know, for those of you who have already read this book or who have read anything else of mine, you know that I'm not shy at all about expletives. So there
You
are a
mean,
few.
do you mean like the sentence?
No.
Do you mean like the sentence fuck? Fuckity
Yeah,
fuck fuck
like
fuck?
that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, and
Okay.
you know, I think that Beowulf probably is one of my more modest forays, you know, with the F-bomb, but there are a few of them in here. And I like to point out that it's always the character saying it and not me.
Okay.
So I hope I don't offend anyone, but you know, there may be some foul language in this. So you ready?
Ready.
Okay. Do you need to know the setup for this, or should I just go ahead and read it?
You set it up as you like.
Okay, great. Well, this scene takes place after Grace and Abby have had what almost turned into an intimate encounter at Grace's home, and they're rudely interrupted when this shrill and supremely annoying visiting artist poet Lori turns up at Grace's door, and it's kind of like coitus interruptus. And she also makes the unfortunate discovery that there's something going on between Grace and the president that probably shouldn't be. And Abby completely misunderstands what Lori is doing there and thinks the two of them had a date and leaves in a huff. And now Grace is going to try to go and fix that. Okay, so
Okay.
here we go. Grace hadn't advanced very far into Abby's backyard before she began to realize how ill-advised this venture was. She'd already tripped over 2 loose pavers on the patio and sent 3 clay pots full of geraniums on to their eternal rewards. The noise made a dog start barking. It was probably Grendel, who was more like an omniscient prognosticator than a watchdog. Why don't I just go ring her fucking doorbell? Her Socratic dialogue continued. Because if she won't take my calls, she sure as hell won't let me inside. And I absolutely don't want to get dumped on her front steps in full view of anyone who was out walking the quad. She made her way toward the 4 sets of double atrium doors that opened onto the patio. Locked, of course. And all of them had big blue and white ADT stickers on them. That'd be just about right. Why not add breaking and entering to my list of crimes? It takes less time to do a job right, Sister Mary Larry had cautioned, than to do it poorly and have to go back and do it over. Fucking nuns. They were all show and no go. She sighed and took a step to look up at the second story of the house. There were lights on in rooms at the back. No doubt they came from the private apartment that was the president's actual residence. The rest of the house was pretty much public space, the college reserved for fancy dinners, schmoozing big buck stoners, and hosting teas for blue-haired stalwarts of the church. Grace took out her little flashlight and shone it against the brick wall beside the atrium doors. Sure enough, there was a trellis. These things were ubiquitous at St. Allie's. This one was overspread with some kind of flowering vines, roses, jasmine, wisteria. She really had no idea. She walked over and took hold of one of the trellis rungs. It felt pretty sturdy. She'd only have to climb about 12 feet to reach an open upstairs window. She hesitated for a few seconds. What was she going to do when she got up there? Climb inside and shout, "Here's Merv!" Or simply creep around until she scared the bejesus out of an unsuspecting Abby, and maybe risk getting shot in the process. Shit, it had never occurred to her that Abby might have a gun. Her thoughts swung wildly back to their conversation about Dean and his ammo caches. Abby seemed completely clueless about what they were. That had to be a good sign, right? And Canadians had no legal right to possess firearms. She'd never actually asked Abby if she'd maintained her Canadian citizenship. Here's hoping. She took a deep breath and stepped onto the rung closest to the ground, and then gently bounced up and down on the ball of her foot to test it and see if it would bear her weight. It did. She raised her other foot and started to climb. The hardest part was finding places to get a handhold around all the damn vines, and they were sharp, studded with pointy little rows of piranha teeth. Shit! She nearly lost her balance and had to grab wildly for a handhold. She felt about 24 obliging spurs sink into the flat of her hand. Geez Louise! At this rate, she'd end up with more punctures than a soaker hose. Why didn't she think to bring along a damn pair of gloves? It was becoming clear that she didn't have the chops to be a successful second story man. She gritted her teeth against the pain in her palms and kept climbing. She'd just gotten high enough to reach for the sill of an open window when she heard someone below gasp, "What on earth are you doing up there?" It was a woman's voice, full of alarm and panic. Grace was so startled and scared she missed the sill entirely and found herself flailing desperately for something to grab hold of. The sudden lurching shift in her weight was enough to overtax the trellis. She could feel it giving way beneath the soles of her shoes. First, one rung cracked, then the other. "Don't you dare move," the voice below her commanded. "I'm calling the police." But Grace couldn't help moving. She started to fall, slowly and inelegantly, shouting profane epithets as she slid down the toothy vines. "Jesus, Mary, and Chia Seeds on a brisket!" Suddenly, her downward momentum jerked to a halt when her jacket got snagged on one of the broken trellis rungs. She hung there, demoralized, battered and bleeding from 1,000 tiny punctures, cursing her life and wondering how the headline in tomorrow's ledger would read when it reported on how a former professor's ill-fated attempt to break into the new president's house got foiled by a thicket of avenging vines. "Grace, is that you?" The voice from below sounded a tiny bit calmer now. It also sounded more familiar. Grace closed her eyes. It couldn't be. "It is you. Grace, what on earth are you doing up there?" Yep, it was Abby, all right. But what the hell was she doing outside? "It's a long story," Grace began, "but it involves Rizzo, so I'm hoping you'll cut me some slack." "Rizzo?" Abby asked. "Never mind that right now. Can you get down from there?" "You mean without falling the last 7 or 8 feet?" Grace asked. "That would be ideal, yes." "Could you maybe help me out?" "How?" Abby stepped closer to look up at Grace through the thicket of vines. "Could you get a chair or something to stand on and help me get unhooked? My jacket is caught on one of these cross pieces." "Okay, stay put." "Oh, I promise," Grace replied. "I've never heard anyone rail against chia seeds before," Abby said while she grabbed a substantial looking wrought iron chair and dragged it across the patio to where Grace hung suspended in space. "Yeah, I guess that was kind of a giveaway, wasn't it? That and your shoes. Not many cat burglars wear red chucks." Abby climbed up on the chair and took hold of Grace's hips. "If I support your butt, can you lift up and set yourself free?" Grace actually laughed, even though her hands felt like they were on fire. Is this a rhetorical question? No, a pragmatic one. Can you do it? To prove her intent, Abby moved her hands to cup Grace's butt. Under other circumstances, this would really be pretty hot. Don't make me laugh. I'm still pissed at you. Grace used all her might to lift her weight and try to shake herself free. Abby did a more incredible job holding up her end of the bargain. "Eureka!" Grace cried. "It's loose." Her excitement was short-lived, however. The vine she was clinging to sagged, then snapped like a dry twig. Grace crumpled downward and landed squarely on top of Abby, who made a valiant effort to remain standing. She nearly succeeded, too, until Grace's full weight came crashing down on top of her. Grace's downward momentum was enough to knock them both off the chair and send them sprawling across the ground. Somehow Abby came to rest on top of Grace, who was lying half in and half out of the presidential herb bed. When she opened her eyes, Grace could see that Abby's hair was dotted with a few sprigs of dark purple flowers. In that perfect moment, she understood that win, lose, or draw, she'd always associate this grand debacle with a heady sense of creeping time and night blooming jasmine. Are you okay? Abby pushed herself up on her forearms. I think so. How about you? Abby nodded. I think you broke my fall. That would be a happy first. Grace, I mean it. I guess I fucked things up. Well, Abby said, climbing trellises really lost its romantic allure after Cary Grant perfected it in To Catch a Thief. That's not what I meant, and you know it. I only came over here because you wouldn't answer your damn phone. So you thought a spot of misdemeanor breaking and entering would soften me up, make me want to talk with you? Something like that, Grace muttered. It was Rizzo's idea. So you said. You called her? No, she called me and ripped me about 25 new assholes for being such an idiot and allowing you to get caught in the crosshairs with that anemic she-bitch, Lori. Abby dropped her eyes. So I guess you know I called her when I got home. Grace struggled to sit up. Abby scooted back and took hold of her arm to steady her. Yeah, Grace said. She told me in ear-splitting decibels that I needed to get over here and clean up my mess by any means possible. Which mess was that? Lori. I had nothing to do with her showing up like that, Abby. You have to believe me. The woman is like a juggernaut who won't take no for an answer. Set her sights on you, has she? Grace shrugged and had to fight not to wince. She knew she was going to feel like shit tomorrow. I guess so. Abby stared at her for a moment before leaning forward and kissing her softly. I've got news for St. Alley's resident poet, she said. Grace's head was spinning. What's that? She's going to lose. Grace gave Abby a big goofy smile, which lasted until Abby took hold of her hand and gave it a warm squeeze. Against her will, Grace let out a tortured whimper. What's wrong? Abby's voice was filled with concern. It's my hands. Grace held one up so Abby could see her damaged palm. Abby's eyes went soft. Oh, honey. Grace nodded. Those damn vines of yours are a menace. Wait a minute. Did she just call me honey? Why don't we go inside, Abby suggested, so we can soak your wounds and put some ointment on them. She scrambled to her feet and took hold of Grace's elbow to help her up. Okay. Grace grunted her way to a standing position. She met Abby's eyes. So you're not still mad at me? Not right now, Abby said, but the night is young and you're a woman of great invention. They started walking slowly toward the patio door, although Grace did more limping than walking. About halfway there, something occurred to Grace. She stopped and turned to face Abby. Hey, where were you anyway? I just risked my life to break into an empty house. Oh, Abby took hold of her elbows. That's easy. I went back to your place. My place? Why? Well, it would appear that yours wasn't the only asshole Rizzo ripped to shreds this evening. Grace smiled at her. Did you leave the back porch door open for Grendel? Abby bent forward to kiss her. Of course I did.
Oh, that's great. Oh, that's great, Anne. Do you like having the opportunity to read something longer than that you normally can read?
I do when I can't see the audience and don't know
Okay.
whether or not they're nodding off.
That's right. Well, I want to say that this line, if I support your butt, can you lift up and set yourself free, is one of my favorite lines in literature.
Yeah, that one deserves to be up and cross stitched, doesn't it?
It certainly does. I'm going to open it up to questions now. If you have questions, please raise your hand with the little icon that's on your dashboard. I'm going to start off by reading a couple that have come in on the chat. This first one is from Karen Cormelink. It's not so much a question as a statement, but I think you'll turn it into a question. Karen says one of her favorite little background pieces in Beowulf was that Grace still loved her and loved and had a relationship with her Trump voting brother.
Oh yeah.
Politics are so divisive these days, and this was a reminder that we can disagree and still love each other. I think that's a good comment. What do you think of
Yeah.
that?
But well, I mean, I'm thrilled that resonated for Karen because I mean, it was deeply important to me to be able to do that. I have two brothers who are kind of, I say this with love, sort of knuckle dragging cretins, who both are Trump supporters, and
Wow.
it's not always easy, to try to find a common language around all of that. So Grace's brother Dean was kind of an amalgam of both of my brothers, both the annoying parts and the really sweet parts. And it did mean a lot to me to show that we can have really deep philosophical differences, with other folks, but still find our way to,
That's great.
care about other things.
That's great. But I will say that one of the other highlighted lines I put in my Kindle was Grace was getting some wine, but then she said, "But seeing my brother's hairy ass made me realize I needed something stronger." That was laugh out loud. Um,
So they start drinking gin at like, 9 o'clock
that's
in
right.
the morning.
I see someone has their hand raised. I don't know who it is. I'm going to go on faith. And can you unmute the audio for me, Joy, for that person? Is there a
Yeah, I
person
just
who has their hand up?
unmuted G McGill.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I just unmuted G McGill.
Okay, thanks. Jane, you have a question?
Hi, Ampha.
Hey, nurse.
Is there a sequel for this in the future?
I'm not planning on one. I honestly don't know what I would do in one unless I, give the dog Grendel brave new. And maybe Grendel gets therapy.
What? So he barks
Do
at
it.
10 and 10 or
Yes,
what?
yes. So Grendel can bark out, can branch out and start barking at other hours of the day besides 9.
It's a
So
great
that
book, and it
Maybe
deserves.
I could write it. Maybe I could write a sequel about, Mary Larry, the nun.
yes, she
There
was
you go.
intriguing. Did that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks. I'm glad you're here. Are there other people with their hands raised? Joey, I can't see that
Yes,
for some
I
reason.
just I unmuted Lynn Ames.
Oh, hi, Lynn. How are you?
Hi there, kids. How are
Hey,
you?
Skippy.
Hi, Thumper. Hi, Thumper.
Hey, Butch.
So, Thumper,
Yes.
I find it most interesting that when I wrote this book for you, you had me choose to address the issue of determinism and fate. What made you or me want to tackle that subject?
Because I talk to your wife a lot, and these are topics that are deeply important to her.
Uh-huh. Thank you.
Well, actually, seriously, that's a really important subject to me, and it's something I think about a lot. And I have struggle with my own faith, and with the place of God or religious belief in my own life. And these are questions that I ask myself all the time, fate or determinism, or, as it says on the back, is God in the machine or just out to lunch? And, I tend to gravitate toward writing stories about characters who are struggling with these issues, people who are raised in homes with certain kinds of faith or belief systems, but end up in a world where those things don't always work the way they should, and how do you find your way? How do you find your place? And how do you reconcile the things that life hands you and the choices and decisions you make with the rest of what you were, taught to believe?
Discussions you and I have had many times.
Many, many times at many, many Dairy Queens.
Over beverages, I believe.
No, over ice cream.
Skippy's not a big drinker, but boy, you put a blizzard in front of that girl and it's on.
Hey, Lynn, thank you for that question.
You bet.
So there's a question here from Elizabeth Anderson. Where do phrases like chia seeds on a brisket come from? She loved it.
Oh, that's really easy. You can't. I'm actually in the part of our house that we call the tree house, and it's where we both work, where I write, and where Salem does her stuff, like right over there.
Okay.
So I'll be like in the middle of writing something, and I'll be like, okay, so this character just fell off a garden trellis and she's plummeting to the ground, and I need her to yell something. And Salem will just go, Jesus, Mary, and chia seeds on a brisket. And I'll be like, perfect, and I'll just write it down. So half the time that stuff just flows right out of her. So
That's
heaven help us if she ever gets her meds balanced, because my writing will tank.
Did you go to Catholic school?
I did not, and I'm so glad you asked me that question. I'm not Roman Catholic, and I write so much about Catholicism that I'm sure many people think that I am. But I've always been, I actually grew up in a very fundamental religious home, not exactly Pentecostal, but not far from that.
Okay.
But I've always been really interested in the Catholic faith, I think because of its, I think of it as less personal. I mean, if you think about it in terms of the ritual and the fact that God, at least in my view of Catholicism, that God is kind of this sort of darker and murkier and more distant kind of being, and that one intercessor is not enough. You have to have a series of them to get to him. And I like the whole Catholic notion of I use man or woman as a pilgrim, as a person who's on a long journey alone, trying to find their way toward, enlightenment or forgiveness or whatever you want to call it. So I think sort of the whole historicity and structure of the Catholic religion, faith, just really appeals to me. So that's one of the reasons that I use it so much in my writing, added to the fact that several of the people in my life who have been the most pivotal in terms of their influence on me have been Roman Catholic priests.
Interesting.
Oddly, go figure.
Right.
But in fact, this book is dedicated to Father James Beatty, Father Jimmy. I actually gave him a little cameo. Just wonderful, wonderful people, full of love and full of good humor. And even in my story collection, 3+1, the main character's brother is a priest.
Right.
So,
Right. Thank you. Thank you for that. I have a question here from Beth Burnett. How much of your rather astute descriptions of academia came from your own real experiences?
Almost all of it. Almost 100% of it. I mean, I decided that I wanted, for anyone who actually read the original story, you may remember that in that story, Grace actually lived in Ohio. And when I decided to turn the story into a full-length novel, I'm like, I don't want to write about Ohio. Apologies to anyone. I mean, I grew up in northwestern Pennsylvania, very close to Ohio, and we always referred to people from Ohio as flatlanders, So, my memories of Ohio are mostly driving across it in the dead of night. But so I thought, well, I want to set the book in a place that I really love and a place I really know, because we're taught to write what we know.
Right.
And one place I really know and love is Vermont. So I decided that I would create a fictitious liberal arts college and set it in northern Vermont. And I absolutely stole intentionally from my own nearly 40 years working in higher ed at small colleges to create the College of St. Albans.
Yes, that's excellent. Welcome to DC.
What is that?
Probably fireworks and hopefully fireworks. So I'm going to ignore that. And there is a hand raised. I don't know whose hand it is. Joy, who is that?
Oh, I was going to say, I saw a couple of questions sort of scroll by where people asked about Grendel the dog and why she barks at 9 o'clock.
Yes.
Well, apropos of Beth's question, the college where I worked for 23 years, Davidson, which is near Charlotte, Davidson College, small college town. And Swanee, I swear to you on everything that's holy, every single morning at the crack of 9, this pickup truck would roar up Main Street right past our office, and there was a dog in the bed barking its head off every day without fail. So within our office, that dog became known as the 9 o'clock dog.
So
So
I heard about that
I
as well.
wanted to put the 9 o'clock dog in the book. So that's why
Yeah.
Grendel barks at 9 o'clock.
I've got another question for you, Anne. So your writing really shows that you love language and you love words. So if words are a writer's best tool, what do you think are the other tools that come in handy for someone like you and the kinds of things you write?
Well, I'm a great believer that not only is language important because it's what's available to us to tell a story, but that words don't just have meaning from the way they're defined. They have meaning and resonance because they sound. So when I write, I actually hear the words in my head. I don't know if you
Okay.
do that, but when I'm writing, it's almost like I'm listening to a script. It's like I'm actually hearing it. I hear the dialogue being. This is not like a Joan of Arc thing, but it's like I actually hear the dialogue. It's like I actually hear the characters talking, and that my job is to write it down. But for me, one of the best tools we have is to use language in the best way we can, so that not only do people get the meaning of the words, but they can almost get it from the way they sound, from how they sound and what they convey when they're strung together. And I think the other tools that I try to use, and I don't know how successful I am, are to write to the senses. It's really important to me to not just describe something, but to give readers the sense of what it looks like and what it sounds like and what it smells like, because those are the things that add richness to all parts of our lives. So I think that as writers, we improve our stories tremendously if we can include those same kinds of sensory and tactile impressions.
I certainly felt that in some of your descriptions of the food they were eating. In fact, there were a couple times I had to put my Kindle down and go get food.
or like try a new kind of wine or something.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the I sort of felt that way about, like, when I decided that I was going to have Grace writing a book about a painting.
I love that. Yes.
Yeah, and it was really weird. And, honestly, I'll admit this to you because I can't go back and change it. But, if I were a really good writer, I would have realized that the real story of this book was that one. That book Grace was writing about that stolen painting, that Willem de Kooning painting that was gone. It was just like cut from its frame in that museum and stolen, and they never found it, and they never caught the people, and nobody ever knew what happened to it. And the fact that she was doing this kind of magic realism thing where the painting was telling its stories about where it was and who had it, in the dialogue. And as I worked along on it, I realized, man, this is cool, and this is actually the real book.
That was really interesting to me. It was almost a story within a story. And as a mystery writer, it really piqued my interest too.
Oh man, you know what happened to me? I was 3/4 of the way through this book, and I'm a linear writer. Like, I outline and I write to an outline, and I'm very linear. I don't like write different sections and jump around. Like, I write straight on through. And I was 3/4 of the way through this book when the New York Times had a story that damn painting had been discovered. And it was like somebody had lobbed a damn cherry bomb, right? Because I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. What the hell am I gonna do? This painting got discovered. So I had to figure that out, and it changed everything about the way the end of the book was going to come together, because everything hinged on that.
Yeah. I'm going to bring one of our attendees in, a question from Tracy Ritter. It felt like there was supposed to be more to Grady's secrecy regarding selling the island cottage. Was there more?
There was not more, and I actually think that's probably a shortcoming, of the book. That that was one thing. I kind of felt like Grady probably was not one of my more effective secondary characters. I didn't really give him very much ink, and he didn't have much to do. So I mean, it's embarrassing for me to admit that I pretty much used him as a plot device, but I did.
Although I felt like he was a nice guy,
Oh, he was a
yeah,
nice guy. He
yeah,
was a really nice guy. He was unfortunately married to a shrew
yeah.
with a really
When
annoying family.
the descriptions of his wife were funny to me.
Yeah,
That was interesting.
yeah.
Joy, I'm going to ask you to unmute Maria Roming. She has a question that Beth has brought to my attention. Maria, you mind asking yours in person? Maria Roming, unmute your microphone and ask your question.
Okay, there it
He's
is.
unmuted.
Hi, Anne. This is
Hi.
Maria.
Hi, Maria.
So I'm just gonna kind of redo this verbatim, but I feel like my English vocabulary has been heightened seriously by reading your book. So did you have words like gulag and crampons already like rolling around in your head, or did you? I mean, I don't fully know your background, so did you have all of that ready on the ready, or did you have to do some research for this book, or how did that
Well,
go as far as
you
the
know,
awesome vocabulary?
yeah, I don't know how awesome it is. Well, thank you. Honestly, Maria, I can tell you, I started writing really late in life. I mean, I was well into my 50s before I wrote my first book, and and probably what I did, I have a really, probably one of the best things about me is that I have a really, really, really good memory. And particularly when I read something, I almost never forget it. And I can
Wow.
remember lots and lots of stuff almost verbatim.
Wow.
And so I feel like for most of my life, I read and read and read and read. And I had like my little mental internal librarian was just taking notes on all of it. And it never really occurred to me that one day I would have all those little index cards that I could flip through and pull these things out. But I promise that's really how it works. I've got a lot of this stuff just floating around up there, and I'm always, like people who are, like I said early on, I use humor as one of the things that allowed me to survive and make it to adulthood. And like any humorist, I'm constantly doing things that are associative to try to come up with things that are funny. So I remember things. I remember passages from literature or lines from movies or, something I saw on a billboard or in an ad, in a magazine, and I hang on to that stuff. And a lot of times my books are like great big ransom notes. But I also do research. I mean, I do promise that, if I'm writing about a topic that I'm not familiar with, I'll do lots and lots and lots of research to try and learn about it. And particularly in my new book, which I spent tons of time doing research. So
Mhm. And can we ask a couple more questions about your writing process? So you said something to me well, you said a couple things that are interesting. One, you can hold all this information in your head and not forget it. That's an amazing skill. You also said that a lot of times you're writing because the dialogue is coming to you. How do you do that and still outline? Is it a mix of?
yes, it
of
is. Like to me, an outline is not a like some of the ones that we had to do in school. You remember we were
Okay,
doing like
right.
critical academic writing, and you had to have footnotes and all. But to me, an outline is kind of like it's like a skeleton.
Okay.
You know that a body has a spine and has shoulders and arm bones and legs and hips and feet and hands and fingers and a head. But what goes on top of that is pretty much up to you. The way you finish it out, but you understand that there's this underlying structure that you're going to adhere to. So if I know, for example, that I'm going to write, I might outline a chapter in the book and say, okay, in scene one, Grace is going to meet CK for lunch at this restaurant, and they're going to talk about these three things, and this is the way the scene is going to end. That's pretty much what
Ah,
my outline consists of.
ah,
And then when
okay.
I sit down to start writing it, then I have the opportunity to flesh it out and build it out and add, other extraneous things in as they occur to me. But I always know where the tall poles in the tent are, that I have to
Right.
get from here to here to here and finish here, almost like
Right.
in a piece of music, where you have so many beats, and then you go to this one, and then you go to this one. So it's not this absolutely rigid outline that dictates, what people are going to say or what might happen when they're together in space. But I
Mhm.
know where it begins, and I know what the middle is, and I know where it has to end.
Mhm.
So,
There's thank you for that, Ann. There's a
mhm.
hand raised. Who is that, Joy?
Cheryl, you're at 15 minutes and Lynn Ames has her hand raised.
Okay, and Lynn, is it the question that you have in chat about CK?
It is, and
Okay, let me read it just to keep us on time.
Sure, you bet.
So Lynn wants to ask about how you got to the very specific specialty that CK has in your book.
Mhm.
Tell us about that.
I actually had listened to a podcast from a physicist whose field was the quantum physics of free will, and I didn't understand any of it, but I listened to it deeply, and I did more research on this guy and his work, and it occurred to me that that was an absolutely fascinating topic that dovetailed perfectly with this whole issue of, is there a personal God who really cares about and directs our lives, or do things just happen the way they happen? And what becomes of the person who's caught in that tension between those two things. So what I really loved was taking this completely irreverent character who is just like covered with tattoos and dresses like a circus clown and curses like a sailor, and who's having mad passionate sex with a man who is completely her opposite in everything,
Right.
intellectually and politically and in every other way, and just and having her be this bastion of wisdom on free will, on and whether there actually is a science behind the concept of free will. So I loved that dichotomy, and I
Mm.
loved making her, like, Grace's life is kind of framed by these two characters. You've got CK, who is this absolute scientist, and then you've got this nun on the other side who completely represents the church.
Right.
And these are like the two voices that are constantly whispering in her ears. And she's
Yes.
trying to navigate her own way,
Right.
through this whole quagmire.
That's interesting. In the hope of getting in more questions, I'm going to ask Avery Brooks' question, which is, I found it really interesting that you chose to write about two women in their late 40s and to have a character who had been married to a man. Why were those aspects important for you to write about?
Because they're real, and that's who people really are. I mean, I know a lot in our literature, particularly, it's really a temptation to write about, gorgeous women who are all 20 somethings,
Right.
and I felt like it was really bold for me to push them forward 20 years. What I'd really like to write about are, some women in their 60s, because that's the life I'm living right now. And I guess I believe that we still have some, interesting stories to tell and experiences to share. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it really mattered to me to try to at least push that envelope a little bit,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and tell a story about two women who were actually around age 50.
Right. Right. Tell me about Sister Mary Larry. She is an interesting character. I could certainly see a sequel that included her.
Yeah, that was kind of that idea about sort of having Mary Larry leave the church was, one of the things that sort of bubbled up while I was writing the book, because I knew that Mary Larry's voice was always constantly going to be echoing in Grace's ear, as her moral compass. And as things began to snowball and her hopelessness about the relationship with Abby really started bubbling up, I thought that would be a fantastic curveball to throw her way, you know, that the one thing that she had always regarded as inviolate and never changing, you know,
Right.
would kind of show up and say, yeah, you know, all that stuff I told you, that was really bullshit. I didn't really believe any of it. You know,
She,
so
yeah, she did lose her equilibrium
yeah,
after
yeah, she really did.
conversation. Yeah, yeah.
She really, and I felt like, you know, in my book Backcast, there are, I don't know if you read that book, but it's got,
I read some of it. Yeah.
so well, it has like 13
Right,
really serious first person essays, you know, that
right.
go through it. And one of them is written by a woman who was a nun, who's very much like Mary Larry, you know,
Uh-huh.
who, you know, had a life in the church and then finally had to leave. You know, so I mean, that's always been a topic that's really fascinated me.
Yes. I could really see a sequel to this book. I guess it's since it's going to be the third iteration, it wouldn't be called a sequel. I don't know what it would be called. But I could see another story about Grace and Abby after they've spent some time on this campus and how are navigating their relationship.
You know, and I wasn't sure when I wrote the book that when, you know, when I was working on it, that I actually was going to come up with a way that the two women could both stay there. You know, because in
Mm-hmm.
my
Hmm.
experience, I really
Yeah.
believed that at the end, if they wanted to go forward with a relationship, one of the two of them would have to leave. And the way that I resolved it was actually, you know, kind of easy. I actually called the human resources director at the college where I worked. And I
Oh,
said, "Hey,
I
Kim,
did see
you
that
know,
thank you in the back of the book.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly." And I said, "You know, I'm writing this book and here's the situation, and I need to know if there's any way possible that this could be satisfactorily resolved so that neither of them would have to lose their jobs or leave." And she was the one who said, "Yeah, absolutely. You know, if the woman who is the president of the college at the time she's hired, you know, like goes to the board and freely tells them about all of this and, you know, gives them the opportunity to either say okay or, you know, no, we're going to ask for your, you know, whatever, all that." And Kim said, you know, if she does that, then there's really no issue.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I,
I mean,
I love,
depending on the community.
yeah, yeah. I also love the crazy guy with the three first names, the hyphenated. I hated him.
Bryce Oliver James. What is it? What is it? CK says a pencil dick with three first names and no
Yes,
chin.
that's right. That's what it is.
Yeah.
I love it. We're coming towards like 7 minutes before we're finished, and I want to ask you about what's next in your writing.
Oh, okay. Well, I can actually show you. I have it right
Oh, good. I think we have the cover of
here. Oh,
something too.
there you have.
Yeah,
Oh, Radcliffe.
I,
Yes,
I,
I'm now
yeah,
writing
there
under a new
it
name.
is.
I'm hoping it'll boost my sales. What do you think?
It's a beautiful cover.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
I wonder who did the cover art.
Yeah, you know, I hire Victoria Avalon to do all of my covers.
Yeah. Oh, do you? I didn't know that.
No, that's a joke.
Okay.
That's a standing joke. She always takes credit for them. Yeah, no, I actually really like this one too.
I do too.
And it's very significant for the story, the Northern Lights. And it's kind of, I don't know, in the background there, but in the upper right-hand corner of the cover, that is the constellation Aquarius, which is
Ah,
very significant in this book. So those things are there. So the book, and here it is finished.
wow,
Ta-da! Here's the
wow.
whole thing. Um, Galileo actually is my second mystery, so I'm going to be very anxious to hear what you think of it, Motown. Um, Evan Reed is she's a dustbuster. She is a paid political operative who vets candidates for national office. So different political parties will hire her to do background research either on an opponent or on their own candidate, someone that who they want to put forward. So in
Mm.
this book, Evan Reed is hired by the Democratic Party to vet the president's nominee for the Supreme Court.
That's all.
And she has a very collapsed time frame, only 2 weeks, to see if she can find anything that isn't already known about this guy. And her best friend is a Roman Catholic priest, yet again, her childhood friend Tim. And what happens is Evan ends up with only one clue to go on. It's one thread she can pull, and everything, it becomes all involved with the sexual abuse scandals that are rocking the Catholic Church, and the grand jury report in Pennsylvania that came forward about 2 years ago and released all of it. So she finds a really sort of slim, very tenuous connection between that and this judicial nominee and her best friend Tim, who is now thinking about leaving the priesthood because of what he knew and never revealed.
Wow.
So all of those things become all bound up together.
Sounds really intriguing and really topical. Did you start writing it before the Kavanaugh hearings?
After
Yeah.
the Kavanaugh hearings and
after the Philadelphia report.
Yeah, exactly. And although this nominee, I mean, he's not Brett Kavanaugh, but you know, there are, but yeah, he's not a nice person. So
that sounds good. When does it come out?
It comes out on November 12th. And it is, not too long. It is, I have finished, it's gone through all of its various edits and you know, content edits and copy edits and everything, and it's ready to go to typesetting this week.
That's excellent. And we're at almost at the end of our time. Okay. It's 8:57. Any kind of closing remarks you want to give to your audience?
Gosh,
have a cocktail?
Yeah, yes. Have a cocktail. Let me take a sip. No, I mean, thank you all for taking time out to be here at 8 o'clock on a work night. I really appreciate it. It means the world to me. And thank you to GCLS for doing this. Thank you to Cheryl and Beth and Joy, all of you. Y'all give so much, and we're all better for it.
Well, you were such a splendid first author.
I hope so.
I don't know how
I washed my hair.
That's right. I don't know how we could have done better. Let me just let folks know that we'll be back next month with the GCLS Online Book Club with Radcliffe's book, Love to the Rescue. The date we're going to convene is Wednesday, September 4 at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And you can register for the book club on the Facebook page. And we'd also like your feedback and ideas about how the book club can be better and how it can really meet your needs. This is the first one we're trying. And this 4-month period between now and December, we're really piloting the book club. So we'd love to hear from our members about what works, what doesn't work, what they'd like to see differently, and also how we might go about the process of selecting our authors and our books. And you are a joy to work with. I feel so grateful to you in so many ways, and I'm so glad you do my book covers. Thank you.
I am too. Thank you.
Cheryl? And
yes.
Cheryl and all attendees, the link to the other sessions, Beth has kindly posted that in the chat.
Right.
So if you just click on the link in the chat, you can register to the other book club sessions.
Okay. And so let me just repeat that. So when you go to that GCLS Facebook page, the link to register for all the other book events are there. So we welcome you to go there. I want to really thank everybody who attended, all 26 of you, and we'll see you next month. And I hope you have a really great night and go have a cocktail on me.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Anne. Bye, dear.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.